I survived 10 years on the hardest difficulty in Songs of Syx. To make everything even harder, I also increased the difficulty past hard to hard plus 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 on every single thing in the difficulty menu. And with that, let's begin our journey. As a Talapi player, I knew I needed a lot of moist farmland, so I settled next to a few lakes and one mountain to localize all the ore into one place, if I ever was going to be able to reach that stage anyway. I knew that there would be a lot of riots over no reason and just straight up nonsense, and natural disasters would be incredibly frequent as well, so I needed to prepare to stock up food at all times. Knowing the difficulty setting I was on, it would probably take forever to construct a hunter, a very reliable source of food in early game, but alas, I was forced to place down huge pastures for now, but I knew that this wouldn't last for long, and I had to do something about it. This would not be enough, but it would be enough for the time being. I placed a warehouse right next to its gate for good proximity, as Talapi they also liked working in pastures. I was likely going to be in high demand for workers really fast as well, so I needed to brace myself. I then placed down some round houses and made sure to construct a mass grave as soon as possible, as I was going to need it. After everything was set up, I put my hands together and prayed to a fury that this first night would go smoothly. Immediately my workers started building up the first pasture, which was also really important because I needed the food a lot. From looking at the map as well, you can see that a lot of the nearby kingdoms were also massive and it would be really hard to get a trade deal. Therefore, I could not rely on this. Anyways, my neighbors gave me gifts, so I guess that was a bonus. Once all my houses were complete, I then filled out the warehouse with what items I needed. I built the warehouse really small, as I didn't want to take up too much time and resources in the very early game. I then accidentally placed down a market instead of a food stall, but yeah, this wouldn't help anyway. To prevent the formation of future riots, I then placed down some trees, flowers and torches in the hopes of reducing crime and improving the environment. I then added some roads to the main farm areas and drew kind of like a template of where future farmland might be. I essentially chose shallow water to place all of my pastures on, as this naturally had fresh water available, so there would be no need to build pumps, which require furniture. I then built Auroch pasture in order to start producing leather and a bit of meat on the side. But the efficiencies were so bad that I was neck and neck between my population increasing and me being able to produce enough food. Later on I built an apple farm because the Talapis, they liked eating apples, although they preferred using orchards for gathering apples. I then finally built the right building and placed down a food stall. I then built a woodcutter in preparation for the carpenter, which will need a reliable and continuous supply of timber. I then built the carpenter itself, as well as a janitor, as some of my buildings were already degrading. The degradation rate was as high as possible as well. I then placed down a cannibal, just in case I ran out of food and people started to die. The more food I could produce, the better. I then imported some apples to start placing them in the apple farms right away, instead of waiting for them to be foraged on the map. I then reached a population of 75, meaning that I'd be given a very small amount of innovation, but that will still be used to upgrade a few industries, and it was definitely needed on pastoral lands. In this difficulty, pastures were heavily reduced, so I needed as much upgrades as possible. I then placed down the first orchard, starting off small, as my apple farm was up and running. I then ran out of stone and had to gather it off of the ground. Pathetic, am I right? Unfortunately, as I was doing this, the first of many riots began. A 6-man riot. That meant that buildings had the risk of being damaged and you'd need to repair them if they were damaged. I then built a road all the way to the nearest clay source in order to start research and improving food security, but little did I know, the hardest possible difficulty setting would also affect research negatively. I then placed down some more houses. Any ounce of dissatisfaction could launch a riot, but on the other hand, riots were unpredictable and you could do nothing to stop them. You can see on the right hand side of the screen, my happiness was always going to be this low. There was nothing I could do to improve it because of the difficulty setting. I'd have to give access to everything, and at this point of time, I just could not do this. I then built the first clay pit to start producing clay, and hopefully build a stone mine as well. I then built a weaver and some more houses. I then built another suburb, and this would be used for closer proximity to all of the mines. I made sure to also place down some essential services as well. I then built a massive cotton farm, as this was a requirement for building nurseries so that my population could reproduce and I wouldn't rely on immigration, which my population also hated. I also built another hunter, as hunters in early game relied on furniture, but they were the most efficient at producing food. And there we go again, another riot has broken out. This time I needed to do even more repairs. As I continued the game, I built another entelodon pasture, as my meat supply was always stable, but it was never increasing. Over this period of time, people kept on joining and then leaving the city because of the difficulty setting. I then built a weaver to start producing cloth for a new nursery and to hand out to my population, as it was really easy to mass produce. And there we go. This was one of the first ever worker strikes, and this halted production of some meat and leather. I also forgot to build a toilet, so I built that in, but that wouldn't make any difference. There'd still be plenty of more riots in the future. Another riot broke out, and 2 days after, I repaired everything again. Construction on the second settlement had been complete, so I built a massive entelodon pasture to keep up with food demand, as it was dwindling steadily. Over this period of time, I was also hunting wild animals on the map, just to get a lot of food in so that people wouldn't leave. Eventually another riot broke out, and I've no idea why. There was also a lot of brawls happening because one person had a completely different religion to everyone else. So it was basically like the 1%ers ganging up on the 99%ers. 1% of my population only followed Shmalom. I can't pronounce it, but you know the religion, and the rest followed craterism. I then started copying and pasting stars all over my map, as tilapis, they liked round surfaces. I then built a tilapia nursery to start increasing my population just a little bit. It relied on apples. I then ran out of stone again and had to dig it up out of the ground, but even that was running low. Eventually I just gave up on the amount of riots that were happening and decided to place trees and flowers everywhere. Unfortunately, another massive riot had occurred with about 30 people taking part, and I had to do a lot of repairs. The first and only laboratory was up and running, but I could only afford some very small and minor upgrades to food production, so I invested it into orchard efficiency. I then reached 200 population, and this is where the population just didn't go up any higher. I then built down the first training ground, as there was a risk of raiders. Actually, there was a massive risk of raiders entering the city since, you know, difficulty setting. I then tried to build a stone mine, but I'm not entirely too sure if it was ever built in the end. I then unlocked the stage to hopefully boost happiness, but this didn't work. From looking at my raid security tab, there was a lot of raiders about, so I was a little bit scared. The first raider showed up and I was forced to pay up just a small sum. I could easily make it back, but it could have been much more devastating to my population. This didn't cause any riots though. I also started training up my troops as well, because troops can be used to end riots. And oh, would you look at that, as soon as I started training them up, another riot broke out. But they had zero training, so they were essentially useless against the masses. I also tried this idea of adding diagonal walls as well to hopefully create more roundness, but this didn't work. I then added another ore pasture for more cloves, as that was also running low. And oh, would you look at that, another riot. But I only had about 19 available troops, so they were still in training. The difficulty setting also affected how fast my troops trained as well. I also ran out of food, so I looked around the map
and hunted some wild animals. And at this point of time, people actually were so dissatisfied by my rule, they started to move out, and eventually half my workforce went missing. And on year 10, I just decided to quit. But you know, at least I survived 10 years on the hardest difficulty without shit hitting the fan too much, if you know what I mean. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya!